The helicopter banked hard over open water. Through the salt-streaked window, a shape materialized. White. Impossibly long. Moving through the Mediterranean like something that didn't belong to this century. The pilot didn't speak. Passengers rarely asked questions on this route. They already knew what they were looking at, or thought they did. From above, it resembled a warship. Clean lines, minimal ornamentation. None of the gold-plated excess that marked other vessels in this price range. This was deliberate. Everything about this yacht was deliberate. The gray hull, the encrypted satellite domes bristling from the superstructure, the way it positioned itself in harbors, always with sight lines to every approach. The crew called it the fortress. The owner called it necessary. Below deck, in a room most guests would never see, screens glowed in the darkness. Market data. News feeds from 18 countries. Encrypted communications cycling through servers in jurisdictions that didn't ask questions. A man sat watching. Always watching. His fortune had been built on information. On knowing things before others knew them. On understanding that in the modern world, privacy wasn't a luxury, it was a weapon. The yacht's name was Aviva, Hebrew. It meant spring, renewal, life. The irony would only become clear later. What you're looking at isn't just a super yacht. It's a floating intelligence hub, designed by a billionaire who understood something most of his peers refused to accept. The ocean was the last place on Earth where you could truly disappear, where surveillance states couldn't reach, where the digital exhaust of modern life stopped transmitting, where deals could be made, conversations could happen, and decisions could be rendered without record, without witnesses, without consequence. $250 million. That was the public number. The real number, the one that accounted for the custom secure communication suite, the reinforced hull modifications, the electronic countermeasures that made the yacht nearly invisible to maritime tracking systems, was higher, much higher. But Joe Louis didn't discuss such details. Not with journalists, not with rivals, not even with some of his closest advisors. Information was currency. He spent it carefully. This is the story of a yacht that was never meant to be just a yacht. Of a man who built an empire on secrets and decided his headquarters should float. Of what happens when privacy becomes paranoia. When power becomes isolation. When the very systems designed to protect you become the bars of a cage you can't escape. The water looks calm from up here. It always does. Quick question while we're here. Where in the world are you watching this from? And what time is it there right now? I'm genuinely curious. And if you're finding these deep investigations into the hidden world of super yachts compelling, a like genuinely helps the algorithm understand this is content worth sharing, and subscribing means you won't miss the next story. Drop a comment and let me know which yacht you want explored next. Joseph C. Louis. The name doesn't trigger immediate recognition the way Abramovich or Arnaud might. That was intentional. By the time Aviva touched water for the first time in 2017, Louis had spent 6 decades perfecting the art of being wealthy without being famous, rich enough to move markets, unknown enough to move through airports without security details. He liked it that way. Born February 1937 in London's East End. Bow, specifically. A neighborhood that smelled like industry and sounded like ambition. His father ran a catering business, small operations, wedding halls, corporate events, nothing that suggested the family would one day control billions. But the father taught the son something more valuable than money. He taught him to watch, to see patterns other people missed, to understand that information about what people wanted, what they'd pay for, what they'd do when they thought no one was watching, was worth more than the food on the plates. Louis left school at 15. Not because he was stupid, because sitting in classrooms felt like watching life through a window. He wanted in. He worked the family business, learned hospitality, service, the invisible architecture of events where deals got made over drinks and handshakes meant more than contracts. He was good at remembering faces, better at remembering what people said when they'd had 3 drinks instead of 2. In his 20s, Lewis went into currency trading. This was the 1960s, before algorithms, before high-frequency trading, before Reuters terminals on every desk. You traded on instinct, relationships, phone calls in the middle of the night when Asian markets opened and European money was still sleeping. Lewis had a gift for it. He could read geopolitical tremors before they showed up in newspapers. A coup in South America meant their currency would crater. A trade deal in Brussels meant the pound would strengthen. You just had to know before everyone else knew. He made his first million by 30, lost half of it by 32, made it back by 34. The losing taught him more than the winning. It taught him that markets weren't rational. They were emotional. Fear and greed and pride disguised as spreadsheets. If you could control your emotions while everyone else panicked, you won. Simple as that. Difficult as that. By the 1970s, Lewis was running serious money, not just his own, other people's. Wealthy families who wanted returns without publicity. Corporations that needed currency positions managed quietly. He built ENIC Group, an investment vehicle that would eventually hold stakes in everything from British pubs to football clubs to property developments across Europe. The structure was opaque, deliberately. Holdings within holdings. Jurisdictions chosen for privacy laws, not tax rates. Well, not just tax rates. In 1992, Lewis made the trade that would define him. Black Wednesday. The day George Soros broke the Bank of England. Soros got the headlines. Lewis made similar bets, similar profits, hundreds of millions when the pound collapsed. But while Soros became a household name, reviled by British tabloids, Lewis stayed in the shadows. Same trade, same windfall, different approach to fame. The profits went into Tavistock Group, his family office, privately held. No obligation to report to shareholders or regulators beyond what law required. Tavistock grew. Restaurants, resorts, real estate. In the Bahamas, Lewis bought land. Developed Albany, an ultra-luxury resort community. Tiger Woods, Ernie Els, Justin Timberlake. These were his neighbors, his co-investors, the kind of people who valued privacy as much as he did. He bought Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. Not as a vanity project, as an investment. He understood English football was undervalued, that media rights would explode, that global branding would turn clubs into billion-dollar enterprises. He was right. He usually was. But money created problems. The more you had, the more people wanted to know how you got it, where it lived, what you were doing with it. Regulators, journalists, competitors. In the age of digital surveillance, every transaction left a trail. Every communication lived forever on servers you didn't control. Privacy was dying. For most people, it was already dead. Lewis thought differently. If the land was compromised, go to sea. If the internet was monitored, build a network they couldn't penetrate. If privacy was dying in developed nations, create a mobile sovereign space that answered to no jurisdiction. The idea wasn't paranoia, it was logic. In 2013, Lewis approached Abeking and Rasmussen, a German shipyard with a reputation for building yachts that didn't just float. They endured. They performed. They kept secrets. The yard was in Lemwerder, a small town on the Weser River that had been building ships since 1907. Through 2 world wars, through economic collapse, through the rise and fall of Germany's maritime industries, they survived because they were good at what they did and better at being discreet. Lewis didn't want a yacht. He wanted a headquarters, a mobile operations center, a place where he could conduct business, manage investments, host meetings, and do it all beyond the reach of surveillance systems that had made land-based privacy obsolete. The specifications he provided weren't normal. Most owners come with architects and interior designers and long lists of aesthetic demands. marble from Italy, wood from Brazil, gold fixtures. Lewis came with security consultants and communication specialists and requirements that made the shipyard engineers pause. The yacht would need military-grade satellite communications, encrypted, redundant, capable of maintaining secure connections anywhere on Earth. The hull would need reinforcements beyond standard classification requirements. Not armor exactly, but stronger than pleasure craft needed to be. The bridge would need radar and sonar systems that belonged on research vessels, not private yachts. The entire vessel would need electronic countermeasures to prevent tracking, eavesdropping, and unwanted surveillance. Abeking and Rasmussen had built unusual yachts before, sailing yachts with hybrid propulsion, explorers capable of ice-class navigation. But this was different. This was a client treating the ocean as a battlefield and his yacht as a base of operations. They didn't refuse. They quoted a price. $250 million, maybe more. The exact figure remains unclear, buried in the layers of corporate entities that finance the build. Tavistock, offshore holdings, trusts within trusts, the kind of structure that makes forensic accountants weep. What's known is that the money flowed, the contracts were signed, and in 2013, construction began. The keel was laid without ceremony. No press, no champagne. Just workers in a German shipyard starting a project that would take 4 years. 4 years of welding, wiring, testing, installing systems that most yachts would never need. The secrecy was intense. Workers signed non-disclosure agreements that covered not just the yacht's features, but its very existence. Suppliers delivered components without understanding what they'd be used for. Even within the shipyard, knowledge was compartmentalized. The communications team didn't talk to the interior team. The engineers didn't discuss specifications with the craftsmen. A welder named Klaus worked on the hull. 30 years in shipyards. He'd built cargo ships, tankers, cruise liners. This was different. The steel they used was thicker than standard. The welds had to meet tolerances he'd only seen in military contracts. He asked his supervisor why. The supervisor said the owner wanted it that way. That was the only answer anyone got. The owner wanted it that way. The superstructure rose. 5 decks, clean lines, no unnecessary ornamentation. From a distance, it could have been a small commercial vessel. Up close, the details revealed its true nature. The windows were larger than typical, offering expansive views, but the glass was treated. Polarized. One way in certain light conditions. The kind of glass that lets you see out, but prevents anyone from seeing in. The interior was handled by Raymond Langton Design, a British firm known for understated elegance. No gold, no marble sculptures, no crystal chandeliers. Instead, polished wood, muted fabrics, technology integrated so seamlessly, it disappeared. The aesthetic was calm, sophisticated, almost austere by superyacht standards. Lewis didn't want his headquarters to look like a floating palace. He wanted it to look like a place where serious people did serious work. The main saloon could host dinners for 24, but it could also convert into a boardroom in minutes. Screens descended from the ceiling. Conference tables rose from hidden compartments. The furniture was modular, designed to reconfigure based on need. One night, a dinner party. The next morning, a strategy session with analysts discussing currency positions in Southeast Asia. Below this public level, the yacht had another life, private quarters for the owner. A master suite that occupied most of Deck 2. Bedroom, office, lounge. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the stern. A desk positioned so Lewis could sit and watch the water while reviewing reports, making calls, managing the empire. The bed was custom, 8 feet wide. He slept alone usually. His wife, his family, visited occasionally. But Aviva was his space, his sanctuary, his command center. The communications room was deeper still. Deck 1, below the waterline. No windows. Just screens and servers and encryption systems designed by firms that normally work with governments. Satellite uplinks provided bandwidth equivalent to a small corporate office. Encrypted phone lines. Video conferencing capabilities that routed through multiple servers, making it nearly impossible to trace the origin or destination of calls. Lewis could sit on Aviva in the middle of the Mediterranean and trade currencies in Tokyo, speak with lawyers in London, and review contracts in the Bahamas, all without his location ever appearing in any system. The crew quarters were utilitarian, clean, comfortable, but nothing like the owner's spaces. 18 crew members lived aboard: captain, first officer, chief engineer, deckhands, stewardesses, chef and galley crew. They worked 8-hour rotations, but in reality, when the owner was aboard, you were always working, always ready, always watching for the signal that you were needed. The captain was a Brit named Simon Meredith, 47, 25 years at sea. He'd worked cargo ships before moving into yachts. Better pay, worse hours. Yacht owners were demanding in ways shipping companies never were. But this owner was different. Lewis didn't micromanage. He hired competent people and trusted them to do their jobs. But he also noticed everything. A loose line on the deck, a crew member who seemed distracted. He noticed, and he remembered. Meredith respected that. He'd worked for owners who treated crew like furniture, invisible until needed. Lewis treated them like professionals. He knew their names, asked about their families, but there was always distance. Professional, cordial, never warm. The captain understood this wasn't a pleasure yacht. This was a floating headquarters, and they were employees of a global enterprise, and the chef was French, Antoinette. She'd worked Michelin-starred restaurants in Paris before burning out on 18-hour shifts and kitchen tyrants. Yachts paid better, and the clientele was smaller, more controlled. Lewis ate simply: grilled fish, vegetables, rarely dessert. He didn't drink much, a glass of wine with dinner occasionally. Nothing that would dull the mind. He was always working, always thinking. Even meals felt like strategy sessions with himself. In March 2017, Aviva was finished. The shipyard prepared for launch. This was usually a public event. Media. Guests. The owner making speeches about their vision, their dreams, the incredible journey of bringing the yacht to life. Lewis attended the launch with 3 people: his lawyer, his head of security, one of his financial advisors. No media, no photographers. The yacht slid into the Weser River on a gray morning with fog rolling off the water. Bottle of champagne broken against the hull by a shipyard manager because no one else wanted the attention. The vessel spent 2 months in sea trials, testing engines, electronics, stability. The sea trials were conducted farther from shore than typical. Out in the North Sea, where commercial traffic was sparse and prying eyes were rare, engineers ran the yacht through scenarios: full power runs, emergency stops, communications tests at maximum distance from land, everything performed beyond specifications. This was a machine built to exacting standards by people who understood their reputations depended on perfection. In May 2017, Aviva was delivered. Lewis flew to Germany, boarded in Lemwerder, and the yacht set course south, through the English Channel, down the Atlantic coast, into the Mediterranean. The maiden voyage was private, just the owner and a skeleton crew. Meredith on the bridge, engineer monitoring systems, a few deckhands, no guests. Lewis spent most of the journey in his office, reviewing reports, making calls. He seemed pleased, satisfied. This was what he'd envisioned, a place beyond reach. The numbers were staggering in ways that even other super yacht owners found excessive. The yacht itself, 98 meters. That's 322 feet. Longer than a football field. Gross tonnage, 1,800 tons. 5 decks with 7 suites for guests, though guests rarely came. The master suite alone consumed 230 square meters, roughly 2,500 square feet, larger than most luxury apartments in London or New York. Range: 6,500 nautical miles at cruising speed, meaning Aviva could cross the Atlantic without refueling. Top speed: 17 knots. Not fast by motor yacht standards. But speed wasn't the point. Endurance was. Autonomy was. Operating costs ran approximately $4 million per year. Crew salaries, fuel, maintenance, insurance, dockage fees in marinas that charged by the meter and didn't blink at seven-figure annual rates. The fuel tanks held 250,000 liters. At cruising speed, the yacht burned roughly 500 liters per hour. That's 12,000 liters per day at sea. At fuel prices in 2017, that was $15,000 per day just in diesel. The engines were twin MTU 16 to 4000 M63 diesels, each producing 2,880 horsepower, enough to push 1,800 tons through water at 17 knots while keeping every light, screen, and system aboard running continuously. The communication suite had cost an estimated $15 million. That wasn't part of the yacht's published value. It was additional, a custom installation that required specialists from 3 countries to implement. Satellite bandwidth alone ran $200,000 per year. The encryption systems required annual licensing fees from firms in Israel and Switzerland that didn't advertise their services publicly. The security measures extended to physical systems. The yacht carried detection equipment that could identify drones within 5 kilometers, acoustic sensors that monitored underwater approaches, not military grade, but closer to it than anything else floating in civilian waters. The crew of 18 earned combined annual salaries exceeding $2 million. The captain made €180,000 per year. Officers and senior crew €80,000 to €120,000. Junior crew €40,000 to €60,000. All tax-free. As crew on vessels registered in certain jurisdictions didn't pay income tax on maritime earnings. They worked 3 months on, 1 month off. Rotations that meant at any given time, some crew were on leave while others ran the yacht. The system was efficient, exhausting, and absolutely necessary for operations that ran year-round. Maintenance was relentless. Seawater corroded everything it touched. Salt in the air degraded electronics. The sun bleached teak decks that cost €800 per square meter to replace. Every year, the yacht went into dry dock for 2 weeks. Hull inspection, mechanical systems overhauled, repainting. The dry dock visits alone ran $300,000. Then there were the unpredictable repairs. A generator failing off the coast of Sardinia requiring technicians flown in from Germany. A stabilizer fin damaged in rough seas near Gibraltar needing parts shipped from the manufacturer in Italy. These repairs didn't wait. When something broke, you fixed it immediately, regardless of cost. The crew didn't just maintain the yacht, they maintained the illusion that everything was perfect, that no matter where the yacht went or what conditions it encountered, when the owner came aboard, it was pristine, ready, invisible systems running invisibly. That took work, constant, grinding work, deckhands scrubbing teak at dawn, engineers monitoring systems at midnight, stewardesses polishing chrome that didn't need polishing because it might need polishing tomorrow. Between May 2017 and early 2020, Aviva established a pattern. Mediterranean summers, Caribbean winters. Exactly the migration pattern of most super yachts. But Lewis used it differently. Where other owners hosted parties, Lewis hosted meetings, business partners, investors, the occasional political figure. Conversations happened on deck, over dinners that Antoinette prepared with ingredients flown in from suppliers in whatever country they were near. Fresh fish from markets in Antibes, produce from farms in Tuscany, wines from private cellars that didn't appear on any list. The meetings were private. No staff in the room except when serving. No notes, No recordings, just conversations between people who understood that some things couldn't be said on land, in offices with assistants outside the door, in restaurants with other diners 3 tables away. Here, on the water, with the nearest land miles distant and the nearest other vessel even farther, you could speak freely. That was the value. The true value. A businessman from Russia came aboard in Monaco, a man whose name appeared in Forbes but whose fortune's origins remained deliberately vague. He and Louis sat on the upper deck, watching the sun set behind the hills above Monte Carlo. They discussed a venture, something involving natural resources in Africa, something that required capital Louis could provide and connections the Russian could facilitate. The deal was never documented. No contracts, no lawyers, just an understanding between 2 men who'd learned that the best deals were the ones that left no trail. An American hedge fund manager visited in Ibiza. The yacht was anchored off the coast, away from the crowded harbor. The manager took a tender out. They spent 4 hours in Louis's office. When he left, nothing had changed visibly. But positions shifted. Trades were made. The manager's fund adjusted its holdings in European banks. Louis's entities moved capital into currencies the fund was exiting. Weeks later, when the positions proved profitable, no one connected the dots. That's how it worked. That's how it always worked. The crew saw pieces, never the whole picture. Meredith knew who came aboard, but not what they discussed. Antoinette prepared meals, but didn't linger. The stewardesses served drinks and disappeared. Louis kept his world compartmentalized. Information was shared on a need-to-know basis, and almost no one needed to know. But below the surface, the crew talked. In their quarters, during late-night shifts, over drinks when they went ashore and Louis wasn't aboard. They speculated, tried to piece together what they were part of. Some thought Louis was just extremely private, a billionaire who'd made his money legally and simply didn't want the world watching. Others wondered if there was more. The encryption, the security measures, the meetings with people who arrived quietly and left the same way. It felt like something beyond privacy. It felt like secrecy. A deckhand named Marcus, South African, 32 years old, had worked yachts for a decade. He'd seen wealth, excess, ego. This was different. Louis didn't flaunt, didn't party, didn't seem to enjoy the yacht the way most owners enjoyed their vessels. He used it like a tool. Marcus mentioned this once to the first officer, a Norwegian named Anders. Anders just nodded. Said some owners treated yachts like toys. Others treated them like offices. Louis was the latter. That's all there was to it. Marcus didn't push. You didn't push on these yachts. You did your job. You kept your mouth shut. You cashed the paycheck. In August 2018, Aviva was in Sardinia, anchored off Costa Smeralda. The area was Superyacht central. Every mega yacht worth mentioning spent time here. Roman Abramovich's Eclipse, Lursen's Azam, Benetti's Lionheart. The harbor was a floating display of wealth, a competition no one acknowledged but everyone participated in. Aviva was smaller than many, less flashy, it didn't stand out. That was intentional. Louis was aboard with family. His wife, his children were grown, but they visited occasionally. The atmosphere was different when family was present, lighter. Meals lasted longer. Conversations weren't about markets and deals. The crew noticed. He smiled more, laughed even, at something his wife said over dinner. It was the most human they'd seen him. But even then, the work didn't stop. Louis would excuse himself after meals, disappear into his office. The lights stayed on late into the night. You could see the glow from the windows if you were on deck. Meredith walked past once, around 2 a.m., checking something with the anchor watch. The office door was closed, but light spilled underneath. Always working, always managing. The empire didn't sleep, so neither did he. In December 2018, the yacht crossed the Atlantic, Sardinia to Antigua, a 10-day journey through moderate seas. This was when the yacht proved itself. The stabilizers kept motion minimal. The systems ran flawlessly. The crew worked rotations that ensured someone was always monitoring, always ready. Lewis spent most of the crossing in his office, reviewing year-end reports, planning allocations for the coming year. He emerged occasionally, stood on deck watching the ocean. Meredith saw him once, late afternoon, leaning against the rail, just standing there. The water was gray. The sky was gray. Wind pulled at his jacket. He looked tired. Not physically. Something else. The weight of knowing too much. Of carrying too many decisions. Of being responsible for too many outcomes. Meredith didn't interrupt. You learn to read moods on yachts. When the owner wanted company, they made it clear. When they wanted solitude, you gave it to them. Lewis stood there for 20 minutes. Then he turned and went back inside, back to work. The Caribbean season was quieter. Lewis spent less time aboard. The yacht sat in Antigua, then St. Bart's, then the Bahamas, Albany specifically. His resort, his community. He had a home there. When he wanted to be on land, he was minutes away. But Aviva remained his true headquarters, the place where the most sensitive work happened, where the most important decisions were made. In February 2019, an incident occurred. Small, but telling. The yacht was docked in Nassau. Lewis was ashore. A journalist approached the marina. She was working on a story about tax havens, about wealthy individuals using the Bahamas to shelter income. She wanted to photograph superyachts as part of the piece, visual representation of where the money went. Security stopped her before she got close to Aviva. The marina had private security, but the yacht also had its own. 2 men. They didn't wear uniforms, just polo shirts and sunglasses. But the way they moved, the way they communicated via earpieces, made it clear they weren't marina staff. They explained politely but firmly that the yacht was private property. Photography wasn't permitted. She argued. Freedom of the press, public waterways. They didn't budge. Eventually she left, took photos of other yachts. Aviva wasn't included. The crew heard about it afterward. Marcus was ashore when it happened. He saw the exchange from a distance, mentioned it to Anders later. Anders shrugged, said the owner valued privacy. That wasn't a crime, but Marcus wondered. How many yachts had dedicated security teams watching for journalists? How many owners took privacy to this level? He didn't pursue the thought. You couldn't, really. Not if you wanted to keep working. The yachting industry was small. Reputations traveled fast. Crew who asked too many questions or talked to the wrong people found themselves unemployed. Marcus had rent. Family back in Cape Town depending on the money he sent home. He kept his questions to himself. Through 2019, the pattern continued. Mediterranean, Caribbean, meetings, work. The yacht was used perhaps 80 days that year. The rest of the time it sat, waiting, costing $4 million per year whether it moved or not. To Lewis, this was acceptable. The yacht wasn't about maximizing use. It was about availability, having the option. Knowing that whenever he needed a place beyond reach, it was there. Then 2020 arrived, and with it, COVID-19. The pandemic that closed borders, grounded planes, and made the world suddenly very small. Lewis was in the Bahamas when lockdowns began. The yacht was docked at Albany. For months, it barely moved. Travel became complicated. Borders closed. Even private yachts couldn't simply go where they wanted. Some jurisdictions refused entry. Others imposed quarantines. The freedom the yacht represented was suddenly constrained by invisible viral borders that money couldn't cross. The crew stayed aboard. They had nowhere else to go. Flights were canceled. Crew changes became impossible. People scheduled for leave couldn't leave. People scheduled to return couldn't return. The rotation system broke down. Crew who'd planned 1 month off ended up staying 4 months, 5 months, watching the world shut down from the deck of a yacht that wasn't going anywhere. Morale deteriorated. Small spaces became smaller when you couldn't leave. Tensions rose. Minor disputes became major conflicts. A stewardess and a deckhand had a screaming match over something trivial. Anders had to intervene, separate them, remind everyone that they were professionals, that they'd get through this. But even he sounded unconvinced. Lewis came aboard occasionally, never for long. He'd spend a few hours in his office, then leave. The yacht felt less like a headquarters and more like a very expensive storage unit. The system still ran. The crew still worked. But the purpose had evaporated. You can't have meetings when no one can travel. You can't host business partners when international movement is prohibited. The yacht was stranded, functionally if not literally. The pandemic exposed something Lewis hadn't considered, that his floating sanctuary depended on a world that functioned, that allowed movement, that enabled the kind of international business he conducted. When that world stopped, the yacht became irrelevant. He couldn't hide from a virus, couldn't encrypt his way around travel restrictions. The limits of his control became suddenly, painfully clear. By late 2020, as vaccines appeared and restrictions began easing, Lewis started using the yacht again. But something had shifted. The confidence. The sense that he'd built something untouchable. It was shaken, not destroyed, but shaken. And then, in 2022, something else happened. Something that would reveal just how vulnerable even the most carefully constructed privacy could be. January 2022. Joe Lewis was 85 years old. He'd built a fortune estimated at $6 billion. He'd survived market crashes, geopolitical upheavals, and regulatory scrutiny. He was known for being cautious, for thinking 10 steps ahead, for never making a move that could expose him to unnecessary risk. So what happened next shocked everyone who knew him. According to federal prosecutors in New York, Lewis engaged in securities fraud. Insider trading, specifically. The scheme was breathtakingly simple. He'd obtain material, non-deferred information about companies. Then he'd share that information with friends, romantic partners, and employees. They'd trade on it. Profit. Sometimes significantly. The indictment filed in July 2023 alleged 19 securities fraud counts. The scheme ran from 2019 to 2021. The companies involved read like a portfolio of legitimate investments. Mirati Therapeutics, Australian agricultural company, others. Lewis allegedly learned about developments, FDA approvals, earnings reports, strategic decisions before they were public. Then he tipped others, made loans so they could invest, watched them profit. The profits weren't enormous by billionaire standards. Millions. Not billions. But that made it stranger. Why would someone worth $6 billion risk everything for gains that barely moved the needle on his net worth? The indictment didn't mention Aviva explicitly, but it's hard not to see the connection. Lewis had built the yacht as a place beyond surveillance, a space where conversations happened without record, where deals could be made, information could be shared, and the digital infrastructure that made modern law enforcement possible couldn't penetrate. He'd created what he thought was a perfect system, and then he'd used it for something that left a trail anyway. Because insider trading doesn't require recording the conversation. It requires following the money. The SEC didn't need to wiretap Lewis's encrypted phone calls. They just needed to see that people close to Lewis made trades immediately before major announcements, that those trades were profitable, that the pattern repeated. Pattern recognition, statistical analysis, the oldest tools in law enforcement's arsenal. Lewis had prepared for sophisticated surveillance. He hadn't prepared for simple detective work. When the indictment became public, the reaction was muted. Lewis wasn't a household name. Most people had never heard of him. Financial media covered it. The British press gave it some attention because he owned Tottenham. But it didn't dominate headlines. No perp walk. No dramatic arrest. He surrendered voluntarily, posted bail, and was released pending trial. The bail was $300 million. He paid it without apparent difficulty. But the indictment changed everything. Suddenly, the privacy he'd cultivated was gone. Details of his business dealings were in court documents. His relationships were exposed. His methods were under scrutiny. The yacht that was supposed to be his sanctuary became evidence, not legally, but symbolically. Prosecutors didn't seize Aviva, didn't need to. The yacht's entire purpose was to enable the kind of private business dealings that were now being prosecuted as crimes. Whether he'd conducted the insider trading aboard Aviva didn't matter. The yacht represented the mentality, the belief that he could operate beyond oversight. The crew learned about the indictment from news reports. They were shocked. Marcus read the articles on his phone during a break, showed them to Anders. Anders just shook his head, said he wasn't surprised, that the level of security, the paranoia about privacy, had always suggested someone with something to hide. Marcus wasn't sure. He'd never thought Lewis was doing anything illegal, just private. But now the line between private and illegal seemed thinner than he'd realized. Lewis's legal team mounted a defense. They argued the prosecution was overreaching, that gifts and loans between friends weren't criminal, that the government was criminalizing normal wealthy person behavior. They filed motions, delayed the trial. In January 2024, Lewis pled guilty, not to all 19 counts, to 3. A plea agreement that acknowledged wrongdoing but limited the scope. The sentencing guidelines suggested he could face prison time. Unlikely, given his age and health, but possible. The plea was entered in a federal courthouse in Manhattan. Lewis appeared via video link from his home in Tavistock Square, London. He answered the judge's questions. Yes, he understood the charges. Yes, he was pleading guilty voluntarily. Yes, he'd shared inside information with others. The judge accepted the plea. Sentencing was scheduled for later in 2024. The speculation was probation, fines, but no prison. An 87-year-old billionaire with no prior criminal record rarely sees the inside of a cell. But the damage was done. Tottenham Hotspur distanced itself, issued statements emphasizing Lewis was a shareholder, not day-to-day management, that the club operated independently, sponsors were nervous, fans were angry, not because of the crime particularly, but because of what it revealed, that the owner of their club had been treating them like marks, using information he shouldn't have had, profiting while others lost. Lewis stepped back from public roles, stopped attending Tottenham matches, stopped appearing at Albany events. He'd spent decades building a reputation as a brilliant but private investor. The indictment shattered that. Now he was just another wealthy criminal who thought rules didn't apply to him. And Aviva, the yacht that was supposed to be his fortress, it became a monument to failure, to the illusion of control. Lewis had spent $250 million, $4 million per year in operating costs, and untold millions in security measures to create a space beyond oversight. And it hadn't mattered. The world had found him anyway. Not through surveillance, not through hacking his encrypted communications, just through old-fashioned police work, following the money, connecting the dots. The yacht remained in operation through 2023 and into 2024. Crew were still employed, the system still ran. But Lewis barely used it. He was fighting legal battles, dealing with sentencing, managing the fallout. The yacht sat in Albany for months, then moved to the Mediterranean briefly in summer 2024. But the trips were different, shorter, quieter, no guests, no meetings. Just an old man on a very expensive boat, watching his carefully constructed world crumble. Crew started leaving. Marcus found a position on another yacht, better pay, less baggage. Anders retired, went back to Norway. Bought a small sailboat, nothing like Aviva, something he could manage himself. No crew, no drama, just him and the water. Meredith stayed on. Captains don't abandon ship, even when the ship is metaphorically sinking. But even he was looking for opportunities, updating his CV, reaching out to contacts. You could feel the end coming. In late 2024, rumors started circulating. Lewis was selling, not just the yacht, everything. Tottenham was potentially on the market. Properties were being liquidated. Whether this was to pay fines, legal fees, or simply to simplify an empire he no longer had the energy to manage, no one knew. But the message was clear. Joe Lewis, at 87, was winding down. Aviva was listed for sale in October 2024. The asking price was not publicly disclosed, but industry sources suggested somewhere between $180 and $200 million. A significant discount from the build cost, but that's normal. Yachts depreciate, especially yachts with complicated histories, especially yachts whose primary selling point, absolute privacy, had been thoroughly discredited. The listing described the yacht in typical superyacht brokerage language. Exceptional build quality, state-of-the-art systems, spacious accommodations, ideal for world cruising. It didn't mention the encryption, the security, the original purpose. Those features, once selling points, were now liabilities. Who wants a yacht designed for criminal enterprises? Even if you're planning to use it legally, the association is toxic. As of January 2025, Aviva remains unsold. It's currently docked in the Bahamas. Albany specifically. The crew has been reduced to a skeleton staff. 4 people maintaining systems, keeping the yacht functional, waiting for a buyer who may or may not materialize. The operating costs continue. $4 million per year, whether it's used or not, whether anyone wants it or not. A monument to ambition, paranoia, and the fundamental human miscalculation that privacy can be bought. What drives a man to build something like this? Not the yacht itself, but the mindset behind it. The belief that you can construct a physical space beyond the reach of a world you can't trust. That if you spend enough money, employ enough experts, implement enough security measures, you can create a bubble where normal rules don't apply, where you're safe, where you're untouchable. Lewis grew up in post-war London. Rationing, austerity, a world where nothing was certain and everything could be lost. That shapes you, makes you cautious, makes you believe that safety is something you build yourself because no government, no institution, no other person will build it for you. He spent his entire life constructing that safety. Financial security first, then physical security, then informational security. Each layer was supposed to reinforce the others. Each layer was supposed to make him invulnerable. But vulnerability isn't something you can eliminate. It's fundamental to existing in the world. You can reduce it, mitigate it, spend millions managing it. But you can't remove it entirely. Because the world is connected. Your actions have consequences. Your interactions leave traces. Even on a yacht designed to leave no traces, the insider trading wasn't about money. Lewis had $6 billion. He didn't need a few million more. It was about control, about believing he'd figured out how to operate without constraint, about testing the system he'd built to see if it really worked, and discovering in the worst possible way that it didn't. There's a broader context here. Superyachts have always been about more than luxury. They're about autonomy, about creating a mobile base beyond the jurisdiction of any single nation, flag states that don't ask questions, international waters where laws get fuzzy, the ocean as the last frontier of lawlessness, not in a dramatic pirate sense, in a bureaucratic sense, where wealth can operate without the friction of regulation, taxation, oversight. For decades this worked. Wealthy individuals parked their fortunes offshore, moved themselves and their assets across borders based on which jurisdiction offered the best deal. Governments competed to attract this capital, offered citizenship for investment, turned blind eyes to questionable sources of wealth. The global system enabled this, encouraged it even. But that system is changing. Tax authorities are coordinating internationally. Beneficial ownership registries are making shell companies less opaque. Automatic information exchanges mean banks report account details across borders. The ocean is getting smaller. The ability to disappear, even with $250 million in hardware, is diminishing. Aviva was built at the tail end of an era when someone like Lewis could still reasonably believe that privacy was purchasable, that security could be engineered, that if you were smart enough and spent enough, you could operate outside the system. 5 years later, that belief looks quaint, almost naive. The crew members who worked on Aviva have their own stories. Most have moved on to other yachts. They don't talk much about their time aboard. NDAs. Professional discretion. The yachting industry is small enough that saying the wrong thing to the wrong person can end your career. But in private, over drinks, they'll tell you it was strange. The most advanced yacht they'd ever worked on, the most paranoid owner they'd ever served, and ultimately the most pointless. All that technology, all that security, all that money. And it couldn't protect him from himself. Marcus is now working on a yacht in the Maldives, a much simpler vessel. An owner who likes to dive, throws parties, treats the yacht like a toy, not a tool. Marcus prefers it. He told a friend that Aviva felt like working on a submarine, always submerged, even when you were on the surface. Always the sense that you were hiding. From what? He was never sure. Now he knows. Antoinette returned to restaurants. A small place in Nice. She owns part of it. Cooks the food she wants to cook. For people who appreciate it. She doesn't miss the yacht. Doesn't miss the isolation. Doesn't miss preparing meals for a man who barely tasted them because he was too focused on his screens. She says the best food requires attention. Presence. Lewis was never present. Not really. He was always somewhere else. Some future concern. Some past calculation. Never in the moment. Meredith took a position managing a fleet of smaller yachts for a charter company. Less prestigious than captaining a 98-meter superyacht, but also less stressful. He doesn't have to worry about encrypted communications or journalists or security teams. He just has to make sure the boats are safe, well-maintained, and the clients have a good time. Simple. He likes simple. The question that haunts this story isn't whether Lewis broke the law. He did. He admitted it. The question is why? Why would someone so intelligent, so experienced, so aware of risk, make such a catastrophic miscalculation? Was it arrogance? The belief that he was smarter than the regulators? Was it compulsion? An inability to stop playing the game even when he'd already won? Was it something darker? A self-destructive impulse that manifests in the wealthy as spectacularly as it does in anyone else, just with higher stakes? We don't know. Lewis hasn't given interviews. His plea didn't include explanations, just admissions. The sentencing hearing, when it happens, might provide insight. Defendants sometimes speak, explain themselves, apologize, or maybe he'll say nothing, take his punishment quietly. Disappear back into the privacy he tried so hard to construct. Aviva sits in Albany. The water around it is turquoise. The Bahamas are beautiful. From shore, the yacht looks peaceful, elegant. A perfect machine resting in a perfect setting. You can't see the desperation that built it. Can't see the fear that drove its design. Can't see the failure it represents. Occasionally, tourists take photos. They don't know the history, just see a big yacht, something to send to friends back home. Look where I am. Look what's here. They don't know they're photographing a crime scene. Not in the legal sense. No actual crimes occurred aboard as far as anyone knows, but in a metaphorical sense. It's the scene where a man's belief in his own invincibility died. Where the fortress he built turned out to be a prison. Where privacy became isolation. Where control became paralysis. The yacht will sell eventually. Someone will buy it. Strip out the paranoia. Redecorate. Rename it. Give it a new story. Yachts are good at that. They're blank slates. You can project anything onto them. They carry no inherent meaning beyond what their owners impose. The new owner will impose something different, something lighter, something without the weight of failure. Or maybe it won't sell. Maybe it'll sit for years, deteriorating slowly, costing millions to maintain while producing nothing. A white elephant in paradise. There's precedent. Yachts from discredited owners sometimes languish. No one wants the association. No one wants to explain why they bought a vessel built for a convicted criminal. Even if the yacht itself is innocent, even if it's just steel and electronics and wood, the stain remains. There's a philosophical question embedded in all this, about privacy in the modern world, about whether it's even possible. Lewis thought it was, thought he could build physical and digital infrastructure to reclaim something that technology had taken away. He failed. But was he wrong to try? Do we have a right to privacy? To conduct our lives, our business, our relationships without surveillance? Or is that a luxury that only exists when you're not doing anything worth watching? The counter-argument is obvious. Lewis wasn't protecting innocent privacy. He was hiding crimes. The surveillance that caught him served a legitimate purpose. Insider trading harms markets, harms other investors. The system worked. The guilty were punished. We should celebrate that, not mourn Lewis's lost privacy. But it's not that simple. The tools that caught Lewis catch everyone. Automatic information exchange doesn't distinguish between legitimate privacy and criminal concealment. Financial surveillance systems don't ask whether you have something to hide before they record your transactions. The infrastructure built to catch criminals captures innocence too. We've made a choice as a society. Or rather, the choice was made for us, by technology, by governments, by institutions that decided transparency was more important than privacy. Maybe that's correct. Maybe the balance is right. But it's worth acknowledging what we've lost. Aviva represents that loss. A physical manifestation of the desire to escape, to find a place beyond the panopticon. Lewis's mistake wasn't building the yacht. It was believing the yacht could solve a problem that can't be solved with engineering. You can't build your way out of the modern world. Can't construct a space so secure, so isolated, so beyond reach that the world can't find you. Because you're still part of the world, still conducting transactions, still interacting with people who leave trails, still human, still vulnerable. The tragedy isn't that Lewis got caught. It's that he thought he wouldn't. That decades of success had convinced him he'd figured something out. That he'd cracked a code no one else had. That his yacht, his systems, his paranoia were sufficient. They weren't. They never could have been. The only way to avoid prosecution is to not commit crimes. The only way to maintain privacy is to not do things that require hiding. Lewis understood the first part, built elaborate systems to address it, but never questioned the second. Never asked whether the lifestyle he wanted, the business he conducted, the risks he took, were compatible with the world he lived in. The sun sets over Albany. The water turns gold, then orange, then purple. Aviva sits at its mooring, lights on, systems running, empty, a fortress with no one to protect, a sanctuary with no one to shelter, a headquarters with no business to conduct, just a very expensive collection of steel and technology and labor slowly consuming itself while waiting for someone to decide what it's worth. The crew who remain aboard go through the motions. They run engines to keep them functional, clean teak that doesn't get walked on, polish chrome that no one sees. They do this because it's their job, because yachts require maintenance whether they're used or not, because letting systems fail would mean even bigger problems later. But there's no joy in it, no purpose beyond technical necessity. At night, one crew member sits on the bow. He's new, just hired to replace someone who left. He doesn't know the full history, knows Lewis is in legal trouble, knows the yacht is for sale, but doesn't understand the deeper story, doesn't know what this vessel was supposed to be. He looks out at the water and thinks it's beautiful, peaceful. He thinks this might be the best job he's ever had. Big yacht, good pay, not much work. He doesn't understand that he's the caretaker of a tomb, doesn't realize that the peace he feels is the peace of abandonment, of purpose drained away, of a dream left to rot in paradise. That's what Aviva is now. A dream. Not Lewis's dream anymore. He's moved on, dealing with lawyers and judges and the consequences of his choices. But the dream persists, embodied in 98 meters of steel and glass and wood. The dream that privacy is achievable, that security can be purchased, that if you're smart enough and rich enough and careful enough, you can construct a life beyond oversight, beyond judgment, beyond reach. The dream is dead. The yacht remains. And somewhere between those two facts lies something worth understanding about wealth, about power, about the fundamental impossibility of escape. You can buy a lot of things: yachts, security, silence. What you can't buy is immunity from your own nature, from your own decisions, from the world you're part of, whether you like it or not. Lewis learned that. Expensively, publicly, painfully. The question is whether anyone else is paying attention, whether the next billionaire commissioning a superyacht will look at Aviva and understand the lesson, or whether they'll convince themselves they're different, smarter, more careful, that their yacht, their systems, their paranoia will succeed where Lewis has failed. History suggests the latter. Humans don't learn from other people's mistakes. We learn from our own. Sometimes, if we're lucky, if we're paying attention. Lewis is 87. He's learned his lesson. But he's also at the end. Whatever wisdom he's gained comes too late to change the trajectory. The yacht he built, the empire he managed, the reputation he spent decades constructing. It's all compromised now, tainted. The inside trader's yacht, the criminal's toy, the billionaire's monument to hubris. That's not fair entirely. Lewis is more than one mistake. He built legitimate businesses, employed thousands, generated returns for investors, supported charities, owned a football club that millions care about. Reducing him to his crime erases context. But that's how stories work. The ending colors everything that came before. A successful life ends in scandal, and suddenly the success seems suspicious, like it was always leading here, like this was inevitable. Was it? That's a question for philosophers, for psychologists, for people who study the wealthy and their pathologies. What's clear is that Aviva, the yacht built to enable privacy, instead enabled the behavior that destroyed it. Whether that's irony or inevitability depends on your perspective, on whether you believe Lewis was a criminal who bought a yacht to facilitate crimes, or a paranoid billionaire who built a yacht to protect legitimate privacy and then happened to commit crimes. The facts support either interpretation. The truth is probably somewhere in between. The yacht doesn't care. It's a machine. It does what machines do. Runs, functions, waits for input. The crew doesn't care either. They've seen too much, worked too many yachts, know too many stories. This is just another one. Dramatic, maybe. Unusual, but not unique. The wealthy are always building things they think will protect them, always discovering that protection is temporary, always surprised when the world finds a way in. Aviva will be someone else's story soon. A new owner will impose new meaning. The yacht will get a fresh coat of metaphorical paint along with the literal repaint in dry dock. The stain will fade. Not disappear. Never disappear. but fade enough that someone can pretend it's not there. That's all anyone really wants. The ability to pretend, to construct a narrative that makes sense. That doesn't have to account for every ugly truth. Lewis tried that. Tried to construct a narrative where he was the brilliant investor who earned his fortune through skill and timing and never crossed ethical lines. The narrative worked for decades. Then it didn't. The truth asserted itself, as truth tends to do. Not through dramatic revelation, just through patient accumulation of facts, through SEC investigators following money trails, through pattern recognition algorithms that don't care about privacy or discretion or carefully constructed reputation. The machinery of justice ground slowly, but it ground. And now Lewis, who spent his life watching markets, analyzing patterns, predicting outcomes, has to live with an outcome he didn't predict, didn't see coming, or maybe saw but discounted, thought the probability was low enough that the risk was worth it. That calculation was wrong, catastrophically wrong, and Aviva sits in the Bahamas, waiting. Engines running, lights on, empty. A question without an answer. A puzzle that doesn't solve. A monument to the belief that boats can be fortresses, that oceans can be walls, that privacy can be purchased with enough money and enough paranoia and enough engineering. That belief was tested. It failed. The boat remains. Perhaps that's the only lesson worth taking from this, that things persist beyond their purpose, that yachts outlast the dreams that created them, that steel and glass and wood are more durable than reputation, more permanent than privacy, more resilient than the men who commission them. Lewis will die. Probably soon. He's 87, facing sentencing, dealing with the consequences of choices that seemed reasonable at the time and catastrophic in retrospect. The yacht will outlast him, will carry someone else's dreams, someone else's paranoia, someone else's belief that this time, this vessel, this configuration of money and technology and isolation will work differently. It won't, but they'll try anyway, because that's what humans do. We build fortresses. We construct privacy. We believe against all evidence that we can separate ourselves from the world we're embedded in. We buy yachts, big ones, expensive ones, yachts with systems and security and specifications that sound impressive in brochures and meaningless in hindsight. Aviva is one of those yachts. Not the first, not the last, just the most recent to have its story told. And the story is this. A man tried to escape, built the machinery of escape, spent millions on it, thought it worked, discovered it didn't. And now the machinery sits empty. Still running, still functional, still pointless. The water laps against the hull, the same water that's been lapping for thousands of years. Before yachts, before billionaires, before the modern world decided privacy was negotiable and surveillance was necessary. The water doesn't care about any of that. It just moves. Predictable, eternal, indifferent. Maybe that's the real lesson. Not about privacy or wealth or crime, but about indifference. The world doesn't care about your fortress, doesn't care about your yacht, doesn't care about your carefully constructed systems of security and isolation. It finds you anyway, not because it's trying, just because that's what the world does. It encompasses, it includes, it refuses to let you separate. Joe Lewis learned that, expensive as the lesson was. Aviva is what remains. Evidence, monument, warning. Take your pick. The yacht accepts all interpretations equally because the yacht is just steel, just glass, just a machine floating in water that doesn't care. And that might be the most honest thing you can say about any super yacht. They're machines, expensive, complex, beautiful sometimes, but machines. The meaning we impose is ours. The dreams are ours. The failures are ours. The yachts just float, waiting for the next owner, the next story, the next tragedy. Aviva is waiting now.